Hello, everyone. My name is Maung Ting Nyeu. I am an assistant professor at UCSB, and also I am an indigenous person from the Jedong Hill Tracts of Bangladesh. Today, I have a profound honor to introduce Professor Barbara Rogoff. Barbara Rogoff is UCSC Foundation Distinguished Professor of Psychology at the University of California, Santa Cruz. She is internationally known for her work on cultural aspects of children learning and for articulating how communities organize learning through participation, collaboration, and shared responsibility. Her scholarship has been especially powerful in making visible the sophisticated learning practices on indigenous communities, practices that are too often dismissed, ignored, or misunderstood in the mainstream development science. Barbara's work has reshaped how we rethink, how we understand learning, not just something transmitted to children, but as something children learn with each other, with the community, in the family setting, and through meaningful contribution. So Barbara received numerous awards. It will take me, probably 1 more hour if I go through this, but just say a few things. She is a Distinguished Lifetime Contribution Award from the Society of Research in Child Development, Chalmers Award for Outstanding Research here at UCSC. She is a Fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, National Academy of Education, and the American Anthropological Association, the Association of Psychological Science, and the American Psychological Association and American Educational Research Association. But beyond this honor and titles, she is a teacher in the deepest sense, someone who learns and works with the communities, indigenous communities, who makes us think and rethink about how we conduct research and learn. I also have to situate myself a little bit. When I first encountered Barbara Rogoff's work, Apprenticeship in Thinking, the Cultural Nature of Human Development, Developing Destinies, I felt something that I rarely experienced in academic spaces. I'm an indigenous person from South Asia, where when I first read Barbara's work, I remember thinking, she's speaking about me. She's speaking about my experience and our communities. So even though her example comes from indigenous communities of the Americas, but her words and her research had deep meaningful to our communities. Something that I had lived, but I did not experience in the academic setting. In addition, I consider myself, Barbara, as my mentor too. So Professor Barbara Rogoff, we welcome you and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That was such a moving introduction. So it takes me a minute to catch my breath. I would like to ask if the students would also introduce themselves, please.
Sure. Hello, I'm Jesse Resnick, first-year doctoral student in the education program here. My previous experience is in democratic schooling, and so I have a lot of questions for you, actually. I saw, like Professor Maung Ting Nyeu, I also felt like I was reading about my experience when I was reading your work, but not growing up working in democratic schools. And I'm here to research the way that artificial intelligence can be used to promote the democratic school values in secondary education.
Wow. Thanks.
Eileen, please.
Hello.
If you speak a little louder, because this is the mic here.
Yeah. My name is Hyungyung Eileen Lee, and I'm also a first-year doctoral student here. And in education. My research interests are mostly with multilingual learners and students in secondary education, so adolescent learners, and looking for equitable literacy resources and teaching methods for students in that population.
Good afternoon. My name is Devin. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a first year in the PhD program. My research interests center around the experiences of men of color, college men of color and high school men of color, and talking about support systems and structures that can be transformed to be better serving, as well as broadly speaking, identity-based approaches to supporting in STEM education for faculty of color.
Thank you.
Hi, Barbara. My name is Cameron. I'm from Aotearoa, New Zealand. Just moved over here to the US. First year PhD in the religious studies program. My research is I'm planning to look at disinformation in Indigenous communities, hopefully back in Aotearoa, New Zealand, so with our Māori communities. So interested in the kind of politics of knowledge, religion as a political category, and Indigenous activism, what's happening in our communities with response to kind of the crazy world we find ourselves in.
Thank you. And the online folks?
Yeah, maybe Kiela Morales, if you could introduce yourself.
I can introduce myself.
Please.
Thank you.
Yeah, apologies for the camera not being on. But my name is Alexander. I'm currently a third year undergraduate student here at UC Santa Barbara. My plans for the future are to attend law school and hopefully get a career in education policy.
Cool. Kayla, are you able to unmute yourself and introduce yourself? Maybe later.
Yeah.
I also am wondering, oh, thank you, Kayla. I see you in the chat. Maybe I'll put the chat where I can see it in case you have stuff in after this. I'm also curious if any of you have connections with Indigenous communities anywhere.
So I whakapapa Māori, so I'm Indigenous Māori to New Zealand. But I have in many ways, I guess, a typical upbringing in that my Māori ancestry is through my dad and my grandmother. But my grandmother, when she was young, both her parents died of tuberculosis, and so she went from speaking only Te Reo Māori to being moved around to family members who didn't think Māori was a useful tool. So in conversations, she said she stopped being Māori when she was 7 years old, despite being a very Māori woman. And it was my dad, didn't hear her speak Te Reo Māori until like the last year of her life. So I throughout my life I've had connections with Māori communities, but I wasn't brought up in a particularly Māori way, like spending a lot of time on marae. But so yes, in some ways very much so, in some ways not so much.
Thanks.
I have a somewhat similar story, in some ways very much, in some ways not at all. My mother is an enrolled member of the Bad River Band of the Lake Superior Chippewa, but I grew up very far from that. And in some ways, the story of her family is leaving that place and moving into the Western world. So yeah, it's complicated.
Yes. Anybody else?
Though not Indigenous myself, I've had the privilege to work with the Yaktitutu Yaktahini Northern Chumash tribe in San Luis Obispo, as well as the Echelon in Monterey County. Through the nature of the work I had done in practice and working in higher education, I worked with the Indigenous and Native centers for probably about 3 years. So it's been a great privilege.
Great, thank you. Anybody else?
A lot of my research interests were informed by my student population. So I was a high school ESL teacher before coming here to pursue my PhD, and the bulk of my students were coming from rural areas in Central America. And a lot of them were from rural parts of Guatemala, actually, and spoke Maya. And so our lingua franca was Spanish, but that really limited the equitable resources that they had. So that's kind of what led me.
Cool.
Aheli, you also spent some time in Colombia, right?
Yes, yeah. So I was briefly in Colombia where I was on the northern coast, close to Venezuela and Barranquilla. And so during my time in Colombia, I interacted in limited capacities with some different indigenous communities there, more like Afro-Caribbean, Afro-Indigenous populations.
Wonderful. And either of the online people want to say anything about a connection with indigenous communities? Well, anytime you would like, you can just let me know. So I guess you're in about the fourth week of class there, like we are at UC Santa Cruz. So that gives me an idea of what you're up to. And I don't know how much you all read what your teacher assigns you to read, but I saw in the syllabus that you had a few assignments of things that I've written and a video that also that I created. Did you look at the video?
Yeah.
Okay, because I think the video is really a great introduction. And it helps people see the phenomenon, not just read about it, which I think is very connected with LOPI or indigenous ways of learning, that if you have a chance to be part of the context, it allows for a different way of learning that is, I think, quite powerful. Because you don't have to rely on lots of extensive explanation out of context. You can kind of feel, even if you're just sort of like looking in for like a fly on the wall when you're watching a video, it gives you the much more of the context than it's usually possible to do with printed printed material or spoken material when you're out of the context of the activity itself, which I think is a really central aspect of all the features of LOPI and indigenous ways of learning. So I prepared a little presentation, but I would invite you all to guide me by interrupting and telling me what you want to know more about, and just we can make this a conversation, but I have stuff to bring into the conversation to the extent that you want it. So, and I think, Maung Ting Nyeu, we were thinking maybe I would present stuff for like half an hour.
Yes, I think that will work fine. And also, I like your idea of making it more conversational.
So I have sort of a half an hour's prepared, but I would like to invite you to stop me, interrupt, and we can spread it out over longer than half an hour, unless, Maung Ting Nyeu, you have something else that you're trying to do today that if you can give me any guideline to when you're moving on to some next part of the class, that would be helpful.
I do not have anything specific. This is primarily for this session with you, Barbara, and we are very honored. So I think that conversation with you and the student also will love it much.
Great. I think maybe I'll just make an aside already on that. And I think the idea of conversation being a way to learn is very consistent with indigenous ways of learning. So rather than one person being the font of information and sort of trying to just dump it into the brains of the people listening, I think it being conversational, it makes it into something that creates a context and creates a way of people sort of adapting what they're asking or telling in a way that they're building something together. So I'll start it off, but interrupt me whenever, and I will share screen because I love to be able to show pictures and videos. So can you see that all right?
Yes.
Okay. So what I thought I'd focus on is cultural strengths for learning that are associated with Indigenous ways of organizing learning. And some of those include sophisticated collaboration, keen attentiveness to what's going on around you, consideration of the direction of the group, initiative, helpfulness, and learning to be community minded. I'd like to just point out that, excuse me, that focusing on collaboration is something that I think everybody would agree is an important tool for learning, and it's a skill for getting along in the world. So just right there, we've got a strength for learning. And I'd also like to point out that different ways of working together occur in different communities. Even though they're overlapping in all communities, there are some things in common as well as some differences. And what I've been focusing on is different learning paradigms. One of them LOPI, the other one assembly line instruction, but there are many others. And we can all learn more than one way of organizing our own or other people's learning. And I think this goes for societal institutions too, which especially I'm talking about school. That school does not have to be done the way we're doing it now. And I think part of my goal in talking about LOPI and Indigenous ways of learning is that I think that everybody would benefit from learning from the ways of learning in Indigenous communities of the Americas. So you've seen this prism, and I'll be talking about some aspects of it. And well, connected with the point I made a minute ago, that cultural practices are always in a process of changing, even at the same time continuing practices from the past. So it's a dynamic process, and that's what Maung Ting Nyeu referred to this book, but it's really a case study of some of the ideas that I've written about in several other more well, in the book, The Cultural Nature of Human Development, or an Apprenticeship in Thinking, the book Developing Destinies is talking about how an individual and community contribute to each other's development. So looking at the town of San Pedro in Guatemala, where I have worked for 51 years now, incredible. It has changed over that time. And Chona, who's the person in that image, she was born to be a midwife. Her practice contributed to change in the community, but her practice was also built on what the previous generations had contributed in her community. So just wanted to underline the changing nature of culture. Just to situate myself in this, the places I have lived as a kid growing up are those with a sun on it. And there's a little image of me as a, I don't know, 4-year-old or something. And those orange stars are places where I've spent some sustained time learning in Indigenous communities. The most influential and sustained is the one in Guatemala, the Mayan community in Guatemala. But I've also spent time in 4 other spots working together with colleagues who are from those places. And then, of course, I've read ethnographies from all over the Americas and some other parts of the world as well. So part of what I'm trying to do here is to indicate that this work is not mine alone. there's a whole consortium of colleagues who are interested in trying to understand how learning is organized in indigenous communities of the Americas. And many of them grew up in indigenous communities of the Americas themselves. And all of them have spent time doing deep and long-lasting research in the communities that they write about. So sometimes people ask, why? Like, why are you doing this kind of research? And this little video that I'm about to show you is one reason why I do this kind of work, and especially why I would want to make that prism. So let me play this little clip for you.
Now, the stuff that you're seeing on the wall is actually Tyson Younger Porter. He's built this 8 ways framework based on Uncle Ernie Grant's framework and has extended on that. I thank goodness for people like that, because as an Indigenous educator, I already knew that I was doing these things, but a light bulb switched on. I'm an Indigenous teacher and I already do these things. Thank you for giving us this language. Now we can explain exactly what we are doing.
So she's not Indigenous person of the Americas, but what she's describing as an Indigenous person who is benefiting from somebody else having developed a framework that helps put words to what she and her colleagues know very well. That's part of my reason for wanting to do this work. And one of the best sources of validation for me in this work is,
Now, the stuff that you're...
I didn't mean to do that. The validation has come to me, like when Maung Ting Nyeu mentioned that seeing my work was a recognition of something that Maung Ting Nyeu already knew. That to me is an important form of validation. So when I go to give talks to Indigenous groups, and I'm remembering one talk in particular where one of the individuals said, well, you know, that's very interesting what you're presenting, but for us Indigenous people, he was from somewhere in the US, for us Indigenous people, it's like, well, duh. And I thought, yes, that's exactly validating and helpful to know that it is well done. So he didn't come, he thought it was boring. Well, I don't think he thought it was boring, but he was saying, what's the news here? And then another person at that same, in that same conversation, she was from Pueblo group in New Mexico. And she said, well, you know, that prism is really valuable for us. She was running a Head Start program or some early childhood program. And she said, you know, when the federal government is trying to get us to do things in a way that does not fit with how we do things, we can use that prism almost like a weapon to talk back to the powerful forces, agencies that are trying to make us do things in ways that are not like what we want, not like our own ways. So that's one of my reasons for doing this work. Another is that I think that the rest of the world, beyond the folks who are already using Indigenous ways of learning, can learn a lot from it. Not just to understand it, but to see that there's some practices that are worth adopting even. So let me just go on. Unless somebody has something you want to say about that so far. Okay.
So,
Yeah.
Barbara, I think that this is, I mean, multiple contexts. So you work with the global south, or I would say in the Americas. And then I found it so much similar to my communities, which is also happened on the world in the Jerewan Hill Tracts. And I think someone coming from Northeast India or Myanmar or Philippines or Thailand may be able to also relate it. How about more of a, say, Western setting in Canada or in the US? Do you see there are similarities or any differences that how it works with the communities in the global south and communities in the Western context, indigenous communities in the Western context?
Well, I'm comfortable generalizing the work that I do to North, Central, South America. That's on the basis of my own work. That's on the basis of my colleagues' work, and on reading ethnographies, including autobiographies of people from that region. I have not, I wish I had several lifetimes, but I have not got the breadth of understanding to be able to speak confidently about other parts of the world. But I can make some guesses. One, I think that probably Hawaii, New Zealand, um, Polynesia,
Yeah,
and Indigenous Australia are probably similar.
that's right.
I think that if we go to Africa, we would find some communities similar and others different. And I can tell you, well, the difference I think has to do with facet number 3 in terms of the collaborative aspect that's present in indigenous communities of the Americas. I have very little data from South Asia on this, but what you say makes me think maybe. And then there's a education faculty member in Minnesota, Maisie. She's I think she's Thai, but lived in Singapore, and so and she sees it similarly. She's also worked in Latin America, in Mexico, and she sees it as similar. So there's a start on understanding this, but it really would take a lot of work for people who know those areas well, who can see, because that prism is a holistic thing. You can't just take 2, 3 facets of it and say, oh, okay, they're doing things the same way. It takes all of those. And so I think what I described for what I mentioned, my guess for Africa, I think probably a number of facets would be the same all over indigenous communities of Africa. But I think that facet number 3 might be different in different indigenous communities in Africa. So it wouldn't be the same phenomenon if it doesn't have the same facet 3. It needs all the 7 to be sort of holistically the same. So, yeah, I see. Go ahead.
I had a similar question, actually. I didn't want to jump the gun. I've got a couple that are out saving until the end, but I wondered if you also have identified overlapping traits in non-Indigenous communities in the West or in general in your travels.
Well, I think everybody uses Lopi some of the time.
Right.
And the prime example is we all learn our first language through Lopi. We learn by listening to what's going on around us. We're embedded in a scene where it's a useful tool, and we want to get something done. And so we use the tools that we see people using. So we might say mo when we want more milk, and it worked. And so we keep learning more language that way for our first language. The other thing is that all around the world, there are populations. I mean, like several of you described that your own family heritage is mixed. That's common. that is really common. And if you look at the Mayan community, for instance, where I've worked, people in the town identify mostly as members of the town, and they recognize that, yes, they're Mayan. They don't think about themselves particularly as being Latinx. But even if you think about just the indigenous aspect of their lives, it's mixed with colonization has been going on there for almost 500 years. And or maybe it is 500 years now. It's almost the 500 mark for when the Spanish came into that area of Guatemala. I think it's another year, maybe, something like that. So a lot of the practices in that town are not, you can't say, is that an indigenous forever practice? No. Okay, but then okay, look at the your classmates in at UCSB who identify as Guatemalan or Mexican or indigenous Guatemalan. They're living in the United States. They're going to a US school. They are carrying forward some of the practices that their ancestors did and others that they've picked up individually along the way, or that their whole community has picked up. Like in San Pedro, about half the town is Catholic, about half the town is Protestant, Holy Roller, um, evangelical, evangelical Protestant. Sorry. Um, and then the rest are increasingly not identified with a particular religion. And increasingly, there's a group that's identifying with Mayan spiritual practices, which were kind of stamped out by the Catholics, but even more so the Protestants. So, so the same would apply to Lopi. And I think it's a super interesting question. Which aspects of Lopi are first to get lost or most likely to be resilient? And I have some ideas about that, which I think I can show you a little bit. But that's well, maybe not so quick answer to that one. Anybody else before I go on a little bit?
This is just like more a comment. John Shaver is an anthropologist of religion. He was at Otago University where I did my BA and master's. He's at Baylor now, and he's most recently been doing research on many sites around the world. We typically observe when the more siblings you have, the less well you'll do at life. It's kind of this basic phenomenon because there's less resources available parent below. But when we see in communities with alloparenting, that is skewed, it's through. So when there's a community resource available with regards to parenting, it challenges that hypothesis. So he's been doing a lot of work into that area lately. So while I wasn't familiar with your work exactly in this notion of Lopi and these contexts, I've been reading articles in a similar kind of looking at this as on a broad site, and one of his sites is in the Gambia, so West Africa, where alloparenting is very common. It would probably support a lot of your research that you see in the Americas.
Cool. Well, let me get back onto sharing some stuff on screen. And I'll go on a little bit. So one of the things that you've seen in my writing, and it's already probably clear, is that one aspect of Lopi and of indigenous ways of learning is a form of collaboration, which I regard as very sophisticated. It involves sharing thinking by working as an ensemble and coordinating ideas. And in a whole lot of studies, some of which you see at the bottom of that slide, we've found twice as much of that sophisticated collaboration in Mexican and indigenous heritage backgrounds as in European American middle class backgrounds. And I want to show you what it looks like. These three girls are in Los Angeles. They are Mexican heritage. I think they're third graders. I'm not sure. And they have a balsa wood bee that's already constructed as a model. And then they have the pieces to construct another one. And I'd like you to watch how they work together. There's not sound, so don't worry about that.
Oh, they're making butterflies.
Honeybee, yeah.
Oh, honey.
Oops. So that goes on for like 8 minutes. And it just continues. Could you tell me what you noticed in how they were working together?
There didn't seem to be a leader.
What else?
Others held different roles. One person was looking around surroundings and pieces. One person was focused on the main picture. One person was coordinating between the two.
What else? So far, you're talking about individuals, I think. How were they working together?
Although you did not have the sound audio, they're talking. So it seems to be they're sharing their thinking, like how they are going to put which piece where, more of a kind of building on each other's ideas.
Yes, but even if you'd had the sound, they were not talking very much. So they're sharing their thinking, but it's not just with words. In fact, they didn't say too much. When I've shown people this clip with the sound on, people sometimes comment they said nothing because they're so little, but they're communicating heavily. And some viewers don't notice how much they are communicating, but without words. I'll show it to you again, and I'll comment as we go. First, I have
I
to
noticed that their eyes were following a lot of the same things. Like when they're handing, there's like, one person going for it, but whenever one person's eyes shift, it's kind of like almost all group begin to follow that way as well. So despite there kind of being like, one of them is holding the kind of the spine of the bee, but they're all following it. And when they get the bigger piece, they're all following it. And when they're kind of, the eye shifting was one of the ones that jumped out to me when they're kind of tracking things in a very similar way.
Yeah, that's great observation. And let me share screen again. And I'll play it again, except for I have to somehow get it there. Okay. So notice how when they move, if you blur your eyes and don't look at individuals, but look at the group. Oh, see how they just all move together there? It's like choreography. It's like a dance. They're not bumping into each other. They're not fighting with each other. They're alert to what the others are doing and adjusting to each other. One of my colleagues, Andy Dayton, describes it as one organism with 6 arms. And I can stop it there. So, Maung Ting Nyeu, I hope you were looking to see if you saw speech.
Not much.
Not much.
Not
Not
much.
much.
They're talking about.
But a huge amount of communication. Did anybody have any other observation you'd like to add? In all of those studies that I cited at the bottom of that slide, the finding has been twice as much of that in Mexican and indigenous heritage communities of the Americas as there is among middle-class European American communities and families. Okay, so now I'll give you something else to think about. All right. So here's a study we did in which we were examining, these are classmates, I think they're fourth grade, maybe fourth and fifth. And we asked them to program in Scratch, program these little characters. And this study with Omar Rubalcaba helps us understand how it is that the Mexican heritage or indigenous heritage kids are collaborating twice as much. Because what we found was the Mexican heritage kids collaborated in both of these ways, proposal building and fluid synchrony. I'll show them to you in a minute. Proposal building means they make a proposal, they consider the proposal together, and then they do some programming based on what they decide. Fluid synchrony is they just get right in there and they can read each other's cues and program together, but without the need for a proposal. So what we found was both the European American and the Mexican heritage kids in this study used proposal building, and they used it to the same extent as each other. But the Mexican heritage kids, and they were indigenous background Mexican heritage kids, they also used fluid synchrony. They used it as much as they used proposal building, which means twice as much fluid collaboration. And what the European American kids, well, I'll show you what proposal building looks like.
And then we're going to go to the duck and he's going to say, kick me. Okay, go to a duck. Wait, let's see how it works.
And here's what fluid synchrony looks like. So what the European American kids did a lot more than the Mexican heritage kids was resisting each other. And I'll show you what that looks like.
Well, I want this one. I want to do the back. Watch this. Wait, stop it.
Wait, stop it. There you have it. So here is a case graph of the data. And this is 10 minutes, which you can see across the left-hand margin. Each little square is a 10-second interval. And each column is a pair of kids, with the European American kids in this side and the Mexican heritage kids on this side. What you can see with the different colors is the proposal building is the green squares, and they're pretty equivalent in the amount of proposal building, both the European American and the Mexican heritage kids. But the fluid synchrony, both of those are ways of collaborating, but the fluid synchrony was really uncommon among the European American pairs and very common among the Mexican heritage pairs. The European heritage pairs did a little bit of it, but it tended to be just spotted around in one 10-minute segment or maybe two. But in the Mexican heritage pairs, it was often a string of programming the characters through fluid synchrony without the need for proposals. The other thing that stands out is the red part, and that is the resistance. And you can see over here that the European American pairs had more resistance, and it tended to go in a string. It extended over time. And with the Mexican heritage pairs, it happened, but it tended to be spotty, just a few 10-second things at a time. There's more to be said there, but let me stop and see if you have questions about the case graph or about the study.
Are the vertical columns like a single column is a pair.
Yes, each column is a pair.
Okay. So we can also notice that like while resistance is much more common among European Americans, there was also some pairs which demonstrate it so much that it really colors the whole graph.
And another way to put that point is there are some pairs that could belong on the other graph, on the other side of the graph.
Mhm.
Like, well, that one doesn't have so much resistance, but it also doesn't have so much blue stuff. Let me see if I can see up
Like the third column from the left.
the third column. It doesn't have that much blue stuff either, though.
Mhm.
I'm looking for one that has a lot of blue, which might be the one, oh, if you can see my mouse, this one. It seems to have strings of blue. And so my point is that it could be on the other side. In this particular study, they don't seem to overlap that much, but in some studies, there's lots of variability between pairs where you could find a few pairs that really belong on the other side of the graphs. That if you didn't know which cultural background they were from, you would put them on in the other graph. Thank you, Alexander. So anything else you want to point out or ask about the study or the graph?
Was there any association between the gender of the students' pairings and how much collaboration or resistance there was?
This is not a large sample. And so I don't think we have a large enough sample to be really reliably asking the gender question. We get it a lot. In most of the studies we've done, maybe all of them, we don't find a strong gender difference. Though if we had a larger sample size, maybe we would see it. Yeah. That variability that was just raised is why I love case graphs so much. Being able to see the variability as well as the overall pattern at the same time. Because probably when I first showed you this graph, you probably saw that red stuff right away, differing across the two. Probably didn't take you long to see there was more blue on the right. It probably took a little bit more care to see that green didn't look like it differed across the two. So you could see the overall pattern, but then you could also look and see you could see individual cases and see that, well, I was trying there to see if there was some European American pairs that belonged in the pattern on the right or Mexican heritage pairs that belonged in the pattern on the left. So you could focus in on cases at the same time as examining patterns in the same graph, which is why I love case graphs. You could also look at, is there a time difference across time? And we looked at that. In the first 60 seconds, the European American pairs look different than their later stuff. And the Mexican heritage kids don't. What it looks like to us is they're spending the first minute or so really negotiating proposals. So they're getting started by lots of proposals and by examining whose idea they're going to use. Like there's more of the black stuff among the European American pairs. That is jockeying for who gets to decide, which is different than discussing which idea to use, which both of the groups did. Anything else before I move along?
Yeah, I've just got a question about like off-task resistance and both off-task. You see both off-task more common in the US Mexican heritage pair, which could also be represented as fluid synchrony, and that they're probably doing something together to both be off-task.
There's not much difference across the groups in off-task. That's the purple stuff at the bottom.
Okay, yeah, I'm just not seeing as much. I might be getting lost in the red, but on both off-task with regards to these. But I'm curious when is off-task, just like thinking about my experience as a child and then seeing children oftentimes resistance in around something can often lead to one person then just moving away from the task. Is that what resistance is mapping here, or is it always when there's like
It's resistance to each other.
okay?
It's resistance to each other, where, like in that example that I showed, where one person wants to do one thing, the other wants to do another thing, and they're not trying to collaborate to figure out which they'll do. They're trying to win. They're resisting the other kid's idea because they want to do it their own way. They like this task. And so it's not like they're going away from the task very much. But this is only the first 10 minutes of their working together, and they had 30 minutes. Some of them finished earlier, and it might be that in some of the ones that some of the ones who finished earlier is probably because they finished doing what they wanted to do and were happy about it. It might be that some of the ones who finished earlier, one of the kids was just getting tired of it, of not being able to do anything or whatever, and that might support your hypothesis there. Anything else before we move it along? Okay, so here's another study that looks now at much younger kids, and it's the same pattern, but I think it's worth looking at as well. We looked at situations. This is in the Mayan community in Guatemala. This is middle-class European American in Salt Lake City. And we brought novel objects to a home visit. We were interviewing the families about the kids' daily routines, and we brought out some interesting novel objects and handed them to the mom and asked the mom to show the toddler how to operate the object. There was always a toddler, a 1 to 2-year-old, and a 3 to 5-year-old. So I'll show you what 10-second, and we focused in on 200 millisecond time segments. The last one was 10-second time segments. That's a huge difference. But this one is 10 seconds, is the whole clip, and we analyzed 200 millisecond time segments. So that's what 10 seconds looks like. And then we looked at it slowly to try to look at the things that you were looking at when those girls were making the honeybee and you were trying to look really closely. That's what we were trying to examine. Noticing things like, look at the postural involvement of the mom, the baby, and the 3 to 5-year-old. They're in it together. And that's what we were especially interested in, that kind of collaboration where all three people were engaged together. The one on the right is not a video, but here's what the data look like. That kind of involvement of all three people engaging together. On the left is 20 Mayan families, on the right is 18 European American middle-class families. And you can see that most of the Mayan, really all of the Mayan families are engaged quite a bit in that, what we called all three mutual. The Mayan family that did that the least is about probably a little bit more than most of the European American middle class families. So that kind of engagement with all three together was really common. This was a while back. Here's what the European American middle class families were doing. The green lines, the middle class families, were doing a lot of this green stuff, which was 2 are engaged mutually and 1 is separate. Like this family on the right, where the mom and the toddler are engaged together and the older child's doing something on her own. That's the green. The yellow, there's a small difference. That's with 0 mutual. None of the participants are engaged together. So here the mom is watching the toddler is watching the older sister, and the older sister is not paying attention to either of them. She's playing with one of the novel objects. And then the red stuff stands out again. So that's resistance. And in this example, the mom and the older child are having a bit of a tug of war over a pencil box, which the mother was trying to show to the toddler, but the older child wanted it. And they're resisting each other. They're pulling together oppositely on the pencil box. So it's a similar pattern to what I showed you with the programming study. Let me just see if you have questions about that or comments about that before I move along a little bit.
Barbara, did you have the video of the European or okay?
I don't have it on the slide, but what I showed you of the resistance in that little still photograph, that was commonly it was that sort of thing that was the form of resistance. Is one person wants access to an object, somebody else also does, and they pull in opposite directions, or they get in each other's way. Yeah, that was common.
In
So
the 18 European families and the first graph you showed in comparison, from what I remember, there were some that have zero engagement. Is that correct?
oh, you're talking about the same study that I just showed you?
Uh-huh.
Okay, let me share screen again.
No, before that, sorry. The one before the engagement.
The study before?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry, I meant like I'm trying to think of the word, but, oh, yes, right here.
This one?
Oh, sorry, one right after. Uh,
Okay, this is just the graph showing
sorry.
only the blue stuff. It's the same
Oh, I see.
blue stuff as in this graph. Is that what you were asking?
Yeah, so then I guess it appears, or even in this graph right here, right, at the 18 European families, that you have like there are instances in which not everyone is not all three are engaged at the same time.
Yeah.
And
I
so
see 4 families.
uh-huh.
1, 2, 3, 4 families in which there was no all 3 mutually engaged.
This
And
might be
about, pardon?
well, it might be far out to ask, but do you know if maybe have determined that in the videos?
So we know what else they were doing. They were mostly 2 people together and 1 apart. This one was like that. This one had a lot of it. This one actually had a lot of resistance, and this one had a lot of all 3 of 2 together and 1 apart. And that was often a situation like this where 2 people were engaged together and 1 was separate. And that makes sense. I speculate that it is a pretty common model of social interaction in European American middle class culture to engage dyadically, 2 people at a time.
And so those very last 2 to the right, is that like that's just them passing it around is what you're saying? Or like one person is taking most of the airtime with the object? Like is the dyadic relationship the same on like between those observing and those interacting, or is it being passed around? Is that making sense? Like, so maybe not all 3 people are engaged at one time on one object, but they're passing it around, or is it one person the whole time?
Well, we didn't pay so much attention to what object it was. What we were interested in was were all 3 people engaged together.
Okay.
But to answer your question, there were 5 novel objects that we coded. And so this 250 is made up of 50 time segments for each of 5 objects.
Oh,
So this is a sum of what happens with 5 objects. But your question is still good. What happens within one object? Is it just one person hogging the object? Probably, because these are 10-second segments. Probably. I mean, if we looked at the whole time they were handling a particular object, which was more like 3 minutes, then there would have been some moving around of the object. But this is the first 10 seconds after the mother puts her hands on the object, when she's being offered the object by the research assistant. And I love this aspect of the procedure because what it means is we've got a comparable context across cultures. The mother has just received an object which she's been asked to help the toddler operate. So what happens in those 10 seconds? And yeah, it would probably be everything around that one object. But we didn't care so much about the object, but whether we could identify, were they all engaged together? Or were two people doing one thing and one person doing something different? Or nobody's doing anything together, or they're resisting each other.
Okay. And then for the 20 mind families, there's that like one outlier, which even though it's still not as much resistance, maybe in comparison to the 18 European families, there's that one like with a fair amount of resistance. Do you know what may have accounted for that, or it just happened?
Yes, yes. In fact, that toddler was playing a game with her mother of resistance.
Okay.
That toddler was pretending to resist, and the mother was pretending to resist back. And so they were doing this play thing, which is very different. Our original coding scheme didn't have a way to account for that, but we've gone back in, and I should change this slide because once we recoded that family and other families about if it was play resistance, that this one was pretty much all the blue stuff and the green stuff, and hardly any red stuff. So I should fix that because it is confusing. But it was play. It was playfulness.
Sorry, I have one more question then. After the recode, do you find that there was a larger difference between the 20 mind families and the 18 European families? Or did you see difference in the 18 European families after the recode or no?
No, it didn't change. I think this was the only one it changed it all substantially. I think there was a few other tiny adjustments, but no, it was just that one little 2-year-old she was barely almost 2. She was just having fun with her mom, and and her mom was having fun with it as well. And we didn't have another way to code it when we did the initial coding, so that's where that is. But I should change that one.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
You said that the objects were initially, in all of the cases, given to the mom. Do you think that it would have changed anything if they were presented to either of the children or either child specifically?
I imagine. Yeah, because the reason why we asked the moms to help the toddler work it is because with the European American middle class families, if we hadn't asked her to work with it, show the toddler, the 3 to 5-year-old would have had it the whole time, and the toddler would never have gotten access. If we'd handed it to the toddler, I think the Mayan moms, we would have needed a way to ask them to help the child that would have been stronger than what we already did. But in handing it to them, the other thing that was probably relevant is the research assistant demonstrated these objects are novel in both of those communities. We also did the same study at the same time in India and Turkey. But we wanted the research assistant to show the mom how to use the object so that we were interested in how moms help kids learn. And so we wanted the mom to understand how the object was used, and then she would help the child. So we tried to do it surreptitiously. We tried to show the mom how to use it without the kids watching. However, and this is relevant, the Mayan kids watched. This is super relevant. This is Lopi. Learning by observing and pitching in. The Mayan kids were on top of what was happening around them. The European American middle class kids, not so much. We could have snuck it past them, or in many of the cases, not everybody was the same. But the Mayan kids were tended to be alert to what was happening around them. So when somebody started shifting position to get the next object out of the bag, or anything like that, they would be noticing. And that is part of the facet 5 of learning by observing and pitching in, is being a keen observer. So, Maung Ting Nyeu, are we doing fine in terms of time and cadence here?
Yes, yes, we're doing fine. Thank you.
Okay. So, what I'm turning to now is, what are some related strengths connected with collaboration that we see in Indigenous communities of the Americas? And this one is the one I was just talking about, aligning with other people and being alert to what is going on around you. So in this study, we had the research assistant showing the one sibling how to make a mouse that runs on an elastic band. And at the same time, she has given the other sibling a chance, asked them to sit on at this table on the side, and handed them an object that they could play with while they're waiting, because they're waiting. When this child is done, the waiting child will get to make a origami jumping frog. So the setup is one in which there's no reason that the waiting child needs to be watching what their sibling and the research assistant are doing. And the table is set in a way that they are not invited to be a part of what's at the table, but they're not excluded either. And so we're interested in their attentional pattern, the waiting child. So let me show you this one. So if you didn't notice that that was a video, you might think that was a still photograph of that little guy on the right. He was sustaining attention in such a studious way. Then, and just to point out, Maung Ting Nyeu, that's my research assistant, Marta, who has been working with me for 51 years.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. Then we also did the study in Salt Lake City with European American middle class families. Same procedure. Let me show you what happens there.
Let's do this first. Roll this up. Oh no, it's going out of control. It's crashing everything in sight. Going to explode. Leave about this much. This much. Oh, that's great. Well, that's great. Now, next step.
So this little guy did not look over to see what his sister and the research assistant were doing. He did look over, but it gives the impression that he was trying to see why weren't they looking at how cute he is and what funny things he's doing. So such a different way of reacting to something that's happening nearby. And what we found was that the European American middle class families and kids reacted that way that this family did, and the Mayan families much more commonly reacted the way that the child in that Mayan setting was reacting. And just to point out, this fits with facet 5 of Lopi, where the way that people learn is by observing broadly and keenly and contributing to ongoing events. And then there's a whole bunch of other ways that are also part of Lopi, exploring the world, practicing and playing, guided by community expectations as well as other people, who guide by example, accept or correct a kid's or a learner's efforts, tell stories, counsel, explain things in context or joke. So what I'm pointing out here is just that alertness to what's going on around them for the Mayan kids. And I think that the European American middle class kids have been trained not to do that. So I think both of them are showing the upbringing, the things that are encouraged in their communities. So let me just
Dr. Rogoff, in what way have they been trained not to do that?
trained not to pay attention.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay. 1, 2, 3, eyes on me. You know that?
yeah, yeah.
Or pay attention to your work. Or yeah, all the discouragement in many classrooms for children to be watching each other.
Hmm.
Or I think probably even in earlier childhood, I think school is a major place where they're being trained not to pay attention to what's going on around them. Actually, I was going to mention that you mentioned democratic schools or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've seen the book that I wrote together with parents, teachers, and kids okay, it's called Learning Together, Children and Adults in a School Classroom. And it's talking about a philosophy that's very similar to Lopi in a public K through 6 school in Salt Lake City. The reason I brought it up is that one of the teachers who was teaching in that school moved to a different part of the state. And she was a fifth grade teacher. And she moved to Moab, Utah, which is pretty far, not the same place. And she thought she could just continue doing things in the new school. She gave up. And the reason she told me that she gave up is that she could not get the kids to pay attention to each other. They were only focused on her. They did not care when somebody else had a good idea. They didn't want to listen to each other because by fifth grade, they had learned that the teacher was the only one that mattered in the classroom. So she gave up and started training horses instead.
To pay attention better.
Yeah, yeah. So anything else on this?
Yeah, I'm curious, like how that dynamic, I guess it's probably hard to find an equivalence here, but in the situation in, let's say, a Guatemalan classroom, when it's time for the teacher to get everyone's attention to provide direction, how does that contrast to some of the strategies that Western teachers use? 1, 2, 3, eyes on me.
Well, first, those are Western teachers. School comes from the United States and Europe, and it uses colonial practices.
Right.
And so the kids, back in the day when the kids weren't going to school, they didn't have that experience. Now they do. And I didn't do that much observation in the school in this Mayan town, but they're practicing mame mu mo mu, and the teacher is in control. And but your question, I think a good answer underlying the question is there's some work by Fred Erickson and Gerald Mohat, as well as Carol Barnhart, looking at Native teachers, North American Native teachers, and versus European American middle class teachers, ways of doing what you were asking about, making a transition in the classroom or directing kids' attention. And what they found in there's two studies. One, the Barnhart one, I don't think is published, but you can find Erickson and Mohat, and it's a really interesting study. The native teacher, it's only a very small sample size, but in the observations with a native teacher for Erickson and Mohat and a native teacher with Barnhart, the teacher joins what the kids are doing to move them. The European American middle class teacher jumps in, interrupting. So she's controlling in a way that breaks what the kids are already doing or tries to. But the kids, of course, don't always do what they're supposed to do. So it becomes a little bit of a tug of war and resistance in her attempt to move them along. But the Adawa teacher and I think it was a Yupik teacher or Athabascan anyway, um, the teacher observes what the kids are doing and waits for a little moment when they, in the rhythm of what the kids are doing, to move in and say, okay, it's time for us to move to the next activity. And if there's a reprimand, the two native teachers move to where the kid or kids are that need to be corrected. And the European American teachers at the front of the classroom kind of yell out. So they're including the whole class when they're really focusing on one group. But the native teachers move to the group that they're trying to correct or make it have an influence with. So there's a bunch of studies with classroom aides in Indigenous classrooms. Classroom aides are much more likely to be from the same community as the children. And watching what the classroom aides do as opposed to what the teacher does. I think Jerry Lipka did that also. Anything else that you want to comment on with regard to the attentiveness of the kid, the kind of sustained attention? We found that in a number of studies, including Mexican heritage in Southern California, Northern California, that kind of attentiveness of the kids, being aware of what's going on around you.
I was curious about whether there was longitudinal research on this. With regards to this attentiveness, and in the readings situated for this week, some examples of how I'm going to butcher the pronunciation. I'm not going to try and but with like be accommodating, and as a way for children to participate in the family, this kind of participation in household chores from an early age, creates quite a familial buy-in and responsibility from a very early age, which can explain some of these notions of observation. It's expected of you, and just what that in a longitudinal sense does to the communities. Does it mean just more people remaining in their community? Is there a resistance at a later stage in life where I'm kind of curious about the kind of long-term implications of these.
Yeah, you've got a whole program of research right there. I've got a couple answers. One is I want to mention a concept in Spanish. It's called being acomedido. It's not the same in other parts of Latin America as it is in Mexico. It means something different in some different spots. But in rural Mexico, being acomedido means being alert to what is happening around you and ready to help. And helping when you see what needs to be done. So being acomedido. So it's a whole cultural value. In fact, when I give talks in Spanish, I don't refer to learning by observing and pitching in to family and community endeavors. I say being acomedido. It is basically the whole thing of Lopi is carried in that one word, being acomedido. And in English, we have to have several sentences to explain the idea of being acomedido. So the longitudinal part of what your comment was, I could think about it longitudinally in two ways. One is longitudinal over a child's life, like going from toddlerhood to middle childhood, or I could think about it longitudinally in terms of a community's life, and I have data on both. Is one how changed? Okay, so here's your make your own adventure question. Do you want me to go to changes over 30 years in San Pedro in collaboration? Or do you want me to go to what might lead into across a child's life to being this kind of alert and helpful person? Which one is more what you were hoping for?
The latter for me.
Okay, we'll go for the second. Changes of,
Because
So
my
within a
first
child's
question-
lifetime.
yeah.
Yeah,
Okay. And then if we have time, we can do the other one too.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think the way I want to get there is to point out a few other strengths relating to collaboration and then show you where I think those come from. And so I need to share screen again, and it's getting dark here, so turn on a light. Share screen. Okay. So another aspect of a related strength for collaboration is being considerate of other people's efforts. So collaborating, this is part of being a comedido, is being considerate of the whole group's direction. And I'm just going to not get to your question quite yet and point out this is a week after the study where this study, a week later, the kids come back and the kid is asked, we tell them, we have extra materials for the thing that your sister made last week. Do you want to make one? And they all say yes. And then the research assistant says, well, I have this, I'm working, I need to read this section here. Let me know if you need help. And then the research assistant follows a script that has them not helping right away. So because we wanted to see how much the kids could do on their own from what they had been able to see or had the opportunity to see the previous week. So we wanted the research assistant to be following a script so we could see how much help the kids needed. So they were tightly scripted. And so that's a situation that this kid is in, and I'll show you what he does. Okay. Oops. Was I sharing screen? Did you see that?
we saw the.
Okay, then I lost the sharing screen. So I don't need to be sharing screen to describe this part of it is, so you saw that kid, I hope you saw that kid wanting help 3 times.
Yeah.
And the way he was indicating that he wanted help was very subtle. He was paying attention to what Mayra, the research assistant, was doing, and he saw that she was busy and not at a point that he could interrupt her, that he could get help without interrupting her. That was what the Mexican heritage kids did. The European heritage kids, we wondered if they would be rude and just sort of pull on the sleeve or insist on attention. And we had a little bit of that, not very much though. What they tended to do is just ask for help, not looking first to see if it was a good moment. So what we saw was for the Mexican heritage kids, actually, no matter whether their parents had a lot of schooling or very little schooling, so no matter whether they came from more rural, urban settings, they all were doing that kind of considerate way of interacting. Unlike the European American kids they weren't rudely interrupting, but they were interrupting. They weren't showing that kind of consideration. So, and it did not seem to vary by indigeneity, rural, urban, for the Mexican kids. indigeneity, rural, urban, amount of education of the parents. We looked to find, because we really expected differences, but we could find no differences within the Mexican heritage populations based on demographics of any of that kind of stuff. So that is a really deep cultural value, I would say, that it stands up to lots of schooling on the part of the parents, migration to cities, and so on. So we can talk about that, but I think let me go on to get to the question about the longitudinal question, unless there's something you'd like to bring into that. It has to do with respeto, the idea of respect, but it's not the way that European American or folks think about respect. It has to do more with consideration. The European American way is much more hierarchical. This is more collaborative. So respect for the direction of the group. I saw some smiles there. What were they about?
One of our colleagues walked by and we could tell he was having a day.
Oh,
We heard a sigh, and then I guess you recognized him as a sigh.
oh dear, having a day. I think we're all having a day these days. So I'm glad we have a few moments of talking about something that's really cool. Okay, so was there anything about this respeto stuff or the consideration stuff before I go on? Okay, so I need to share again. I've never tried sharing and unsharing so much as this before, so I hope it's not distracting. Okay, so another, that one relates to facet 4. This one is taking an initiative to help without being asked. And you can see in the image that there's an 8-year-old who's running the family photocopy machine. She's the expert, and she just knows what to do. But in the foreground is her little sister, who's about 4. She's also helping. So that idea of helping without being asked is also a related strength that's associated and common in the indigenous communities of the Americas and not so common in European American middle class communities. That one relates to facet number 2. Also related to facet number 2 is children taking initiative to help without being asked at home. So when we asked moms how their kids got involved with helping out at home, the Mexican heritage families, almost all of them, said, well, the kids pitch in with initiative. They just do it. They just help. And the European American families, 80% of them, said, well, they don't help unless we threaten them with taking away their allowance, or we pay them by giving them an allowance, or we take away their privileges, or we threaten to. It's under the control of the adults. The kids are not pitching in with their own initiative. Only 16% of the European American families said that their children helped without being asked. So that is another aspect of facet number 2, is just this expectation that everybody helps. And so then here I'm getting to the part you were asking about. So there's all these strengths for learning that I've been trying to describe: sophisticated collaboration, keen attention, consideration for the direction of the group, helpfulness, taking initiative. So how are these fostered? This gets us to younger kids. One of the ways that the kids are encouraged to be paying attention, to be helpful, to be collaborative, is by being included. I'm just going to show this little bit of a clip, except for it says I can't. That's okay. We don't need it. The kids are part of the community life, part of the family life, and that is facet one of LOPI. And the kids say that household work is just everybody's responsibility, Mexican heritage kids. Everybody pitches in, everybody should help because we live here. And it's voluntary. The 9-year-old explained that no one tells her to wash clothes. She said, I just do it because I want to, because it's born from my heart. Now, that is the central thing to, I think, answer your question. It's born from my heart. And when we talk to mothers of small kids about how their children get involved or what they do when they're small children, 1, 2, and 3-year-olds, when they want to help out with something, when they want to get involved in adult work, what do the moms do? European American moms, middle class moms, said we try to do our work when they're not around because they get in the way. And Mexican heritage moms said, oh, yeah, it's nice, and we're glad they're helping. And they insist that it needs to be from the heart. Nacer del corazón. We heard that phrase over and over again. It needs to come from the heart, meaning they need to be agency is involved for the child, initiative is involved for the child. And that is a developmental goal for the Mexican heritage and indigenous families more generally, I think, in the Americas, is that there's agency along with an orientation to helping the group. So it's both independence and interdependence together. So it has to be born from the heart. And we can see in this little image here, here's a 1.5-year-old, and she is helping load the dryer or the washer. And her help is welcomed. That's what the moms told us. And the help is welcomed not so much because it's helpful, because the mom could have probably done that just as easily on her own or maybe more easily, but because they are helping the kids learn to take initiative, to be a part of things. Here's a mom that's expressing pride in her child, 3-year-old, learning to be a part of things. So this developmental goal, she had just said that her kid is learning yeah, he sweeps around the house. But that's not what her pride is about, because the kid sweeping is not necessarily that expert, but she is proud that the child is learning to be a part of the community.
Quiere enseñarse, quiere, no sé, ya entrar a la familia, como de vamos a hacerlo para nosotros mismos. Como es algo bien, como entrar al círculo de vamos a hacer esto todos juntos.
So I hope you could see her pride there in just explaining. We were interviewing European heritage moms and Mexican heritage moms in the Santa Cruz area. And just so the developmental goal of children learning to be participants in the family and community with their own initiative, that I think is a big part of what we were talking about earlier about how do the European American middle class kids learn not to do that, not to be helpful, not to pay attention to what's going on around them. They're told not to. If they try to help, the mom says, oh, go play. Or give some makeshift work to do, not actually productive, not part of the productive work. So they're told from age 1 or 0, this is not for you, this is for us. We do this part. You go play. Or you sleep while I get this other stuff done. That's teaching the kids, I think, that it's not theirs. And that they should not be paying attention, that they should not be showing initiative. And instead, okay, so when they get to age 6 or 7, and the moms and dads are hoping that they'll be helpful, those kids have already learned they're not allowed. It's not for them. So now the European American middle class parents have to try to pay the kids to help, which of course fits with the economic system of middle class European American families, where so much is about pay and about control. So the adults have to control what the kids are doing. The Mexican heritage moms told us it would get in the way of our kids' development if we were telling them what to do, paying them for what to do. They need to learn, it has to come from their heart. They have to learn this community mindedness. When we asked European heritage middle class moms, do you think that a kid could be doing this under their own initiative? Almost all of them said no, and some of them said, well, that's a dream. That's a dream world. That could never happen. And so it's just a different, very different view of the role of children in very early childhood that we think connects up with the ways that kids in middle childhood are attentive to what's going on around them, collaborative in a very sophisticated way, involved with the other people around them, considerate of the direction of the group. All of those things we think are connected with this early childhood stuff. So that was a long little account. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question. I think this is, as you mentioned that from the early childhood, the parents set the expectation and cultural expectation. I wonder, thinking from the child perspective, do you think it is also child understands that it is expected of them to observe?
Yes.
It is expected of them to pitch in.
Yes.
Even though this is like a 2-year-old, that child knows that their parent expects them to pitch in. So yes, it is coming from the heart, but also they kind of develop this understanding is that when parents do something or something is trying to do some work and it is expected of them to observe or not.
So I don't think I would think about it that way. It might be the case, but I think 1-year-olds everywhere want to be involved with the
That's
people
right.
around them. So they're allowed to be involved. They're encouraged to be involved if they want to be. But I don't think they have a sense that they're expected, that somebody is wanting them to be involved. It's more like they're allowed and appreciated for being involved. I don't know if that's what you were driving at.
Yeah, but not as a 1-year-old. I think it's too young. But I say as they get older, say 8, 9, or 10, at that time they have more agency, but also they kind of understand that they may have, it is expected of them. It is their duty to pitch in.
Oh,
Observe.
okay. Expected and
not.
duty, I would put quite different. So we kind of have an idea of what expectations are for how we behave, but we don't necessarily think that's our duty. So I would distinguish those two. Expectations, yes. And sometimes scoldings come if you don't pitch in or if you aren't observant. So Pablo Chavajay, I don't know if you know Pablo, but Pablo says that when he was, I mean, a kid who's 8 or 9 has already learned a lot from their family.
That's right.
And I think he was probably about 8 or 9, and he would ask his dad a question. He's Mayan from San Pedro. He would ask his dad a question about how something is done. And his dad would say, what, you have no eyes? Okay, there's a scold that no, you're expected to pay attention. Okay, and another one from some others of my former grad students who were Mexican heritage. Yeah, and they mostly heard about the term being a comedido when they were scolded in ways like, why can't you be a comedida like your cousin? So it's a showing an expectation, but it's not an obligation. And duty, I think, implies obligation.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And the little ones, and the way the families are with the little ones, I think it's just appreciation that they are helping. Because the moms would say, one of them I'm remembering says, well, this is a different mom than the one I was just showing you. Well, he tries to put his toys away and he's helping. Well, he is helping, even though I have to put them away, straighten them up afterwards. So the Mexican heritage moms are talking about it as help. European American moms in the same situation do not describe it as help. They describe it as play.
I feel like I could describe my experience with teenagers at the Democratic school very similarly.
Which part is similar?
Well, allowing them to help. Actually, teenagers really want to step out into the responsibility of co-ownership of their environment, their present, their future. And so it's more often allowing them the opportunity to than giving them the agency and authority over the situation to step into that. And it often looks like allowing them to clean up and be helpful and then cleaning up after them anyway.
So I have a question, Maung Ting Nyeu, about early childhood in your community in Bangladesh, because I think this may also be related. In the Mayan community that I've been working in, if a baby wants something, you don't go against the will of the baby. You either give it to them or you try to persuade them to not get it, or even you could even lie to them about something to persuade them not to do something or not to want the toy that some other kid wants or something like that. And the reason for that is the kids up until about age 2 are assumed not to understand. They're described as not understanding. And so you need to treat them collaboratively so that they can become collaborative. And what we found was children by age 3 were already treating their baby siblings collaboratively. So if the baby wanted something, the 3-year-old handed it over, maybe crying because they wanted it too, but they're collaborating with the baby. So the 3-year-olds are showing initiative, voluntarily collaborating with the group. So my question about your community, is that similar? Because I think that is a basis.
Yeah, I can give 2 examples. One what I observed even in December when I was visiting Chitan Hill Tracks. So the parents bring vegetables from the field. Now the vegetable is that you have this stem and leaf is connected with the stem, and you will cook the leaf only, right? So parents, particularly mom, sits and then try to separate the leaf from the stem. And then you can see the little kid, even like a 2-year-old, and sits next to mom and then try to separate. So mom doesn't discourage, even though say the kid is doing something that is probably not exactly, because mom also, if a leaf is say dry or something that is becoming yellowish, don't put it. But the kid doesn't know all those differences, but the kid try to help. And they take a stem and then separate. They try to stem and then separate. And I see this example very clearly that so I saw this in 2 settings. One setting is where in one family, you have the mom and the children do it. The other one is community event. So we have someone passed away in the community. So even when I was growing up, was when someone passes away, you don't wait for their invitation. We know in a village that we go if not just passes away, but something that say they may need help because the events are like they have to prepare for the funeral. And when all these people come, you have to prepare food so that people come from long distances to honor the deceased person, maybe a village elders, a relative, so that they can eat and sleep. So the young meaning that say even children under 10, they just go to their house, not being invited, not being called. So why? Because they know that this family will need help. So, and from the adult perspective, what I have seen, adults tell the family member, when from the other family, they come in, say, they know that their grief is stricken, so you don't have to think of cooking and anything. We will cook. We'll cook in your house, but we'll do the cooking. So that's what adults do. But the children, they just walk up to their house and then say, do I need to cut a tree branches? Do I need to, because we have something, funeral is more of a cremation. So the way that cremation happens in the village is that you put the pile of woods and then you put the dead body on top of it and then put some more and then that's. But the other thing happen is that you just don't have the dead body lying. You create a case, but it has flowers, it has colorful thing, decorated basically. But much of this decoration work comes from the people and children, and then they pitch in, the whole village pitch in. So the children see that from an early age, that if anything happens in the village, we all are going. We don't wait for being invited. And then what happens is that this time, what I saw, now we have to cook, say for 300 people. Because the person who passed away, he was a village elder and he is well known and a good man. So there are not only just relatives, people who just knew about his and benefited from his work or from his help with generosity, they come to pay respect. So at approximately like say 30 or so women and few men, they are preparing food. The children who are 2 years old, 3 years old, 4 years old, they are helping out with the vegetables, with separating the fruits, and also when you eat in a kind of festival like this, not festival, a funeral or a festival events, we eat on a bamboo leaf. So you wash the bamboo leaf and then put the food on top of it. So I have seen that the kids go to the bamboo tree because, sorry, not bamboo, banana leaves, sorry, banana leaves. So they cut the banana leaves and bring it. The other one is that when people sit on a place, lying, sit, so now, and then the kids go in, put the banana leaf in front of each of them. And we don't ask them. So the little more adolescents, they bring the food, but the kids do, like 4 years old, 5 years old, they try to help in many different ways. So funeral is a very communal event. It has never, I have seen in my life as an individual event and within just family or close relatives. It is a whole village. Funeral is a whole village thing.
That's beautiful. And it is so parallel to what happens in San Pedro, down to the banana leaf. It is a banana leaf. But I was there when I was there a couple years ago. A person that I knew well and was a prominent and well-respected person in the community fell off her balcony and hit her head and died. And this is a town which over 30 years has gotten quite globalized. And people now, instead of growing their own food, are in jobs with salaries and hours. So even though people have jobs with hour schedules and hours and things like that, everything was dropped. And this person was prominent enough that everybody came together. The men had some responsibilities, the women had other responsibilities, and the whole town was sort of at a standstill because this takes priority over the time that you're supposed to be at your job. And so I just watched this, the initiative, the collaboration, which I knew was there from before, but seeing it around a funeral, it's still there, even though now the families are, they have changed in so many ways over the 50 years that I've been going there, so many ways. But that's still there, and it's super impressive that they would just, there's priorities, and that's a priority. So yeah, thank you for your account.
And if I may share one more example, which is I saw also, which is this time, and I knew it before. It is that, so here, any day of the week, anytime, pretty much, except it's midnight, I can go and buy things from the supermarket. In the Hill Tracks, we have people come to the field 2 times a week. So these are the markets, meaning that people bring their vegetable to sell, their rice to sell, their coconut to sell, and then after they sell it, they may need to buy oil, they may need to buy candles and others and all kinds of stuff. So villagers who grow vegetables and fruit, they come and sell into this market. If you don't go to the market in those 2 days, you have no vegetable for the week. So now the mom, when they are selling, say eggplants or banana or other fruits and vegetables like guava and papaya. So they bring this in a basket, and basket they put it like in the back, but it's with a rope or small thin rope is from the carry the weight from the head and also on the back. So they put the basket on the side. They put few say papaya, guava, and eggplants in the front. So the buyers come by and then say, okay, how much it is? Okay, they are selling. The kids is watching it intently, what mom is doing and what they're doing. So when mom sells, say, 2 papayas or 3 papayas, and the kid goes to the basket and then pick up 2 other papayas and put it in the front. Mom doesn't need to ask the kid. This kid is I think is probably 3 to 4 years old. So I see that in the communities that that children play, and this is like pitching in. The kid is too young now to understand how to count and take the money. But as they get older, then by the time they're 6, 7 years old, they can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10. So then they also have, listen, mom is selling and someone is taking the money and then bring the food. So in a local market, we see the parents, especially the mom, and sometimes mom and dad both, selling something. where the child is sitting next or standing next to the mom, because when the child stands, which is similar to the height of the mom sitting, that's what I remember. So taking the fruit or the papaya from the basket and putting in the mouth.
This is beautiful. So I have one more thing that I think I want to mention, and I recognize that we're getting on in the time, but let me just, because you guys are in a school of education, there's one thing I want to just mention, and I've already mentioned, but in a little bit more detail. And that is, schools can be organized in ways that are similar to Indigenous ways of learning. So the school that I mentioned earlier, the K through 6 public school in Utah, this is the book that we wrote together, parents, teachers, kids, and school administrator, about the philosophy of learning together, of collaborating together in a classroom setting. The kids are pitching in. They have, I think this is going to sound very familiar to your democratic schooling circumstances, but the kids, I'm just wanting to point out that they're doing something very much like LOPI. And it involves, the kids are included in the decision making about the curriculum, about where they're going to go, what they're going to do. They are expected and want to be pitching in to help each other. They are collaborating with each other, learning from each other, paying attention to each other. And it fits with LOPI, with 6 of the 7 facets of LOPI. The 7th one is harder. The 7th one has to do with evaluation. And in this school, it's kind of a mixed model for evaluation, because, okay, it's parent volunteers in the classroom, and there's a sort of a record keeping thing that's a form of communication between the teachers and the parent volunteers, especially because parent volunteers are different people each day. I mean, they're all the people from the classroom, but like I might be the Wednesday morning person or something like that. And then somebody has to continue the same activity that we started on Wednesday. So what does the Thursday morning person need to know about the activity and about the kids, how the kids did in the activity? So it is a form of evaluation that is helpful for knowing how to support the kids. There's also testing, state standardized testing, because this is a public school. It's part of Salt Lake School District, and it's mandated, it's required, but they don't pay that much attention to it. The kids, well, they pay attention to it in one sense. The teachers tell the kids, this is important because it makes a difference in whether we can still have this school. It makes a difference in whether the school district gives us the money to have this school. So take this seriously. It's like playing a game. Here's the rules of the game. Here's like guess or don't guess. So they teach them how to do a standardized test. They tell them get enough sleep, take this seriously. But then the scores on the test are not something that they're for the sake of the survival of the school, not for individual evaluation. So I just wanted to mention that it's possible to do schooling in a way that is similar to LOPI, and then just say thank you for the conversation. I am going to stop sharing and see if there's any last stuff that you all want to bring into the conversation. Thank you.
I have a question that's kind of more to do with your career than anything in particular. You note in one of the points that, early on before you gained tenure, you kind of had to play the game and kind of present data in a particular way. But then once you had, a bit more of a position, you were able to really engage in kind of pushing the boundaries, especially around this kind of notion of cultural context and mutually constituted. culture. And could you speak to that? Because coming from, like, I'm in religious studies department, I'm working in Indigenous studies as well. And in Indigenous studies classrooms back in New Zealand, a question we'd often come back to is, cool, we keep seeing these neoliberal institutions as being problematic. Why do we keep trying to change them? Why don't we just go make our own institutions? So like, I keep returning to this question of like, cool, I'm here playing the game. Maybe in 10 years, 15 years, I can make meaningful change, but I have to keep playing the game to get there. And so I just, when you shared your experience with kind of having to play the game to do some of the research you really wanted to do, it was familiar to me. So yeah, I was just curious if you could speak on that.
So I'm hearing two different questions there. One about me and my career, and the other one much more broadly about like whole communities and whether they could get away from playing the game of school. Both good questions. Which one which one were you asking though?
Well, you in your in the transforming by participating article we read, you talk about how like some of your early career work in like the, let's say in the 80s was talking about some of these similar themes, but it wasn't until you had tenure that you were able actually to push back on against kind of outside influences on your work.
I see. I see.
And you were able to kind of strive forward, but clearly then you had to spend those first few years of your career really just playing the game, being like, yeah, okay, take it in your stride, and before you were able to kind of push boundaries a little bit.
Okay, I understand. I think I would talk about it a little differently, though I think what you're talking about is also accurate. To my experience. In my early part of my career, it wasn't that I was uninterested in what I was doing. I wasn't just playing a game. I was doing research that I found interesting. But there was a part of the research that I wasn't speaking about as openly because it was not something that would help my career. It would get in the way of my career if my line of work were seen as just sort of a sideline of what's important in the field, then my work would not have I wouldn't have a voice, and my work would not have an influence. So it wasn't so much that I was just going through the motions of the research, but that I was choosing how I spent my time in my early career. And then I kept doing it even when I didn't need to, when I recognized that I could be talking about culture much more openly because I was a full professor by then. It was like 10 years after I got my PhD. I could be more open, but I was being overly cautious. And then I realized, okay, but it was a change in me, my position in academia, and the world that made me realize, oh, it's time for me to speak up about that. I was speaking up before, and the things I was doing were helpful for me. Well, learning how to do the field, contributing to the field. I was doing work mostly on differences between adult-child interaction and peer interaction. So it was looking at interaction that I liked. I enjoyed that work. I learned a lot from that work. It really helped me develop. There was cultural aspects to what I was doing without my calling attention to it. Like I was trying to get the world to pay more attention to context. So the paper that I wrote in 1982 was really saying the same stuff I'm saying now. And I was 5 years post finishing my PhD. It was an attempt to explain why I was doing what I was doing to my faculty colleagues when I was up for review. I think it was up for either my third year review or my tenure review. And I knew that I was supposed to have a program of research. And I was interested in this, that, and the other. Spatial cognition, mother-child interaction, and I think there was a third one. That's too many. And so I thought, or at least I thought it was too many. So I thought, well, I need to convince them that they're all part of the same thing. But it was hard to think about how were they part of the same thing. Now I realize probably any two or three things that somebody is doing is a part of the same thing, but they don't know how to describe that same thing that they're a part of. So that article in 1982 was my attempt to talk my colleagues into thinking that I had a program of research. But in the process, I figured out what my program of research was by trying to explain it to other people and convince them. Well, I came up with a paper that was original and well cited, and it had the idea of mutually constituting right there. I was exploring those ideas with my grad students along the way. So it was a matter of sort of reading the audience also. Like at that point in time, the field of cognitive development, which is where I was, the field of cognitive development was all about individual children. I had arguments with colleagues about whether social interaction matters. Social interaction. And they were strong arguments, and they were trying to say, no, it doesn't matter. It's all in the individual, blah, blah, blah. It's hard to imagine. But so I was caught up in those arguments. Moving to the idea that culture matters, whoa, that was way beyond the field at that point of cognitive development. There are other fields that were already working in that area, and some of them I was in those other areas. So I had an interdisciplinary training, which helped with all of this. So part of it was reading what the field, how to make this understandable to the people who are reviewing articles, who are judging people for tenure. But that's not just like trying to play the game. It's like trying to influence things. So if we are trying to make a difference in the world, we kind of have to pay attention to the zone of proximal development of the field and think about, okay, what's the little angle that we can take that might move things along a little bit? And so in some senses, it's playing a game, but it's also just the basis of communication. If you want to communicate, you got to have some idea of what the people you're talking with already understand, what they're interested in, what they're ready for. That's actually the hardest thing for my TAs, is figuring out when they're giving feedback on student writing, what is the student ready for? Because it's very easy for them to make lots of critiques, just lots of critiques. There's lots to critique. Choosing which one to do now, that is necessary for helping somebody learn to write better or to understand the topic better, rather than giving them a barrage of corrections. Learning how to tailor the feedback to what the person being fed needs, that's actually facet 7. That's facet 7 and I've got it right here. So how and why to evaluate. Contributions are evaluated during the endeavor to guide support for improving the endeavor. Success or correction of the contribution to the endeavor gives feedback. So it's evaluation not only of the learner, but of the support for the learner. That's sort of the communication point that I was trying to make, is that it's not just like we deliver something and then we test to see was it received. It's more of a collaborative thing about, okay, we're trying to get something accomplished here. We're making the tamales for the funeral celebration. Um, and I can see that this little child already understands that the banana leaves go on the left or the right of the spoon. And so I'm evaluating their knowledge, but I'm also evaluating, do I need to help them with that? Um, so my point is I don't know if I've answered anything about your comment or your question, but
No, that was fantastic. Thank you.
Are there examples you've seen of Loki being enacted in schools, like in secondary schools or in subject matter instruction in particular?
Well, I have uh, there's a former UCSC PhD who's trying to do that in seventh and eighth grade math using Lopi, especially with Mexican heritage students. That's in San Jose. I'm trying to do it in my classroom,
That
and
was
that,
my follow-up question.
yeah,
In what
yeah.
ways?
Okay. Um, so I'm teaching a seminar right now. It has about 30 students. And we are working towards sharing information about Indigenous ways of learning with the world. Okay, so they will have a project. They will be developing projects in small teams to share the information. I've taught the course before, and some of the projects that come out of this are things like a video, and I could show you a beautiful video. In fact, I showed you a little bit of it. That little girl that is putting clothes in the dryer. That was a video from one of the families, a family of one of the students, and the students used it in their video about facet number 2, about children pitching in with initiative. So they made a 5-minute video about, and they used clips from their own families or relatives' families to create that. So having a shared purpose is a part of it. As a community, as small groups. Today, I showed them that video clip of those 3 little girls with the bee, making the honeybee. And I asked them to analyze it, and they said some of the same things that you were saying, maybe a little bit more. And so they were analyzing it beautifully, just sitting around having seen the video. And one of the things I said after they did a beautiful analysis of what was going on, I said, that's what I want you to do in your groups. And then turned it to how do you collaborate in a group of college students? So those are some examples. I try to tell them what the purpose is of what I'm assigning, the readings that I'm assigning. Like I showed them today that we're starting the quarter with a sort of a general idea of cultural aspects of human development. Chapters 1, 2, 3, and then the chapter for next week, chapter 8, turns to ways of learning, cultural ways of learning. Not about indigenous ways of learning yet, all kinds of ways of learning. The next week, we're going to get right inside, beginning to get expert on indigenous ways of learning. And I told them from the first day that this class, them being in class and reading the stuff, keeping up, it matters because we don't want to misrepresent the folks' ways that we're going to be trying to share with the world. So this matters. And we have to do it in a way that doesn't essentialize and blah, blah, blah. So they have reason to be coming to class, to listen to each other, to do the reading. And it isn't because I'm telling them I'll take your grade away if you don't. I also don't use grades during the quarter. So I give them feedback on a scale that connects with the real world. So they write an essay every week on what they've been reading. The top of the scale is this paper has ideas that would be publishable with further work. The next thing down on the scale is This paper is so productive that if I had time, I'd want to share it with the class as a whole, the ideas with the class as a whole. The next one down is this paper is exemplary. It could be a model for other students to see how to do this assignment. And then it goes down from there. So it's like sentences or phrases tied to real world consequences. If you do this kind of work, then it even could be published. If you do this kind of work, it could be a model for your classmates. So those are some examples of how I'm trying to have the students be there for some reason other than just feeding me back information that I'm feeding into them. So they need the information to do something that matters to them. Now, they didn't sign up for the class knowing that this was going to be what happens. They didn't even sign up for the class knowing it was going to be about indigenous ways of learning. The title of the class is about sociocultural theory or something like that. So these are students who signed up for the class because it's the right time of day. And so, I mean, if they were grad students who already had chosen that their careers are on indigenous ways of learning, it would be a different thing. But even with students just being there by kind of chance, once they see their classmates are interested, and some of the classmates are always interested, so that brings along the ones that are, I have one that's not doing so well. One out of 28 that he's not coming to class enough. Everybody else is coming. Everybody else is reading. And so, and the reading is informing them so that they don't say something stupid when they're trying to tell the world about this important way of learning. And they do care already. The UCSC students, they care already about not essentializing people. They care about people from underserved minorities and stuff like that. So they've got sort of ideals that fit in with wanting not to misrepresent the way of learning that we're talking about in the quarter. I don't know. I could go on and on about this for forever.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So
one question I had in this, so maybe connecting to this is that those among us who are interested in indigenous education or work with indigenous communities, or even work with minoritized or marginalized communities, your work is very well known, not just only in the US. I was speaking with scholars in Hong Kong. This time I stopped by in Hong Kong and then chat with them. I have a relative studying in Australia. They say, yes, your paper is being is a part of their reading list. She is doing masters there. So I think it is pretty well known within this community. In the mainstream development science, do you see LOPIs getting more acceptance, or what is holding back in the human development or the mainstream development science?
I don't think it's getting taken up by the mainstream.
What is holding back?
Well, it's a different paradigm. People have to make a paradigm shift to understand a lot of what we've been talking about. And I try to help people in my classes make a paradigm shift. But just the field in general, they're very tied to the idea of adults controlling kids, the idea that learning is a process of accumulation of information in the brain. The banking model or the factory model that's the basis of a lot of mainstream research. So moving to an idea that learning is a process of becoming a more capable contributor to a community, that's a whole different theory of learning than the mainstream tends to work on. I don't know if that is enough to explain it. Um, it's maybe harder to do this kind of work than it is to do just add another variable to your experiment. But I don't think it's that. I don't think it's that. I think it's more, this is so far from what they're used to. Oh, I was mentioning earlier working within the zone of proximal development of the field. I think it's still far from the zone of proximal development of the field. There's more people who are interested in and connected, and that's partially because there's more people in the field who have experienced it in their own upbringing. Um, yeah, no, it's a really good question.
I mean, I've had conversations with faculty here who are like, well, even teaching isn't a priority anymore with regards to trying to maintain a career. So they're like, we're teaching here because we have a role to fulfill. And there, it's part of our, desire to, this is why we're in it. But in terms of career advancement, teaching's not prioritized. And so then the notion of different approaches to that teaching or, whether. So I think there's it is a demands a paradigm shift. And there's also, it's like, there's a lot of political critique within a lot of the writing with regards to marketization of education and to that degree. So yes,
I think you're right. I
um,
think there's a lot of people who are in the field to play the game.
Yeah.
And to play the game in developmental psych, you need lots of participants, some fancy statistics. If you can, a big machine that measures brains.
Those are expensive machines.
Big and fancy statistics. And it doesn't really matter who your participants are. You can use the students that you're compelling in your Psych 1 class to be in your study, and you can treat them as though they represent everybody in the world. Yeah, I'm just remembering that we're recording this.
I can turn it off.
I don't think I would mind people seeing that. I think it's true. I think it's true. And I think everybody recognizes there's a problem in academic research if we are just treating more pages as more value. I had one of my advisors as a grad student was Shep White. And Shep White was a brilliant guy who I learned so much from him. But one of the things he said is that he thinks that when people get their PhD, they should receive a certain allotment of pages. And that's their lifetime allotment. So if they use up that number of pages when they're 33, they're done writing. And can you just imagine how much more pleasant it would be if everybody was sort of being careful how much they wrote instead of trying to spew more papers?
In fact, it is the other way around. That means that the more you can spew papers, the higher and faster your career moves.
I'm trying to resist that. I mean, I have been trying to resist that, and I still am. I was an art major. I think I mentioned that in one of the papers. I was an art major. My mom was an artist. My dad was a scientist. And I think of what I'm writing as art,
Right.
as well as science.
Okay.
And so just spewing stuff, that is not art. That's just crass. It's not doing good for the world. It's just like consumerism, like just producing more. So yeah, but it's a challenge because lots of grad students now, undergrads now, feel like they have to have publications in order to get into grad school. So what kind of publication is that going to be? Do we want to read it? Probably not. Sometimes yes, but mostly not. Yeah, you were going to say something.
I'm curious, it's kind of a pivot, but I'm interested in, I think I'm just like considering like what could the outcomes be if LOPI was to be implemented in like teacher education as like a means of like teaching instructors how to teach in that way and that model. And then also I'm curious about how maybe that could or would or should be reinforced in peer interactions as a means of like, I don't know, I think a hot topic recently is like collaboration and like what that looks like and what it could look like. So I think those are things that I'm just kind of left thinking about. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things we studied in that school in Utah is parents are volunteers in the classroom. How do they learn to be collaborative? They come in, most of them choose, this is previously, I haven't kept up with the school in the last years. They mostly were choosing the school so that their kids would not have a banking model of schooling. They wanted to get away from assembly line instruction. So many of them, most of them, or it was common to go towards thinking that children's learning is run by children and adults should just stay out of their way. So that pendulum swing between adult run and child run, which I wrote about in case you want to find it, it's back like in the 90s. The pendulum swing between adult run and child run and collaboration being off that pendulum swing. It's not an average, it's not halfway between, it's a different thing. It's a paradigm shift. So it took 2 or 3 years. This was a study I did with Eugene Matusov. It took 2 or 3 years for parents to learn, no, it wasn't on that pendulum swing. It's about collaboration, including me. And I wrote one of the chapters in that book is titled, it's by me, it's Learning to be a Cooperative Parent in a Parent Cooperative. Because it was a whole shift of perspective to get there. So how do you get there? The parents in that school routinely say, we need a manual. How do we do this? How are we supposed to do this? Well, there is a manual, but they don't read it. And people tell them what to do, but that doesn't help them. In order to do it, in order to teach people LOPI, you have to do LOPI. They have to be part of LOPI instead of being the receiving end of assembly line instruction, which is how often university students are treated. So yes, I think it could happen. It wouldn't be easy to change things, but once it's changed, it's easy to do. And it's so much fun to do. But making the shift, because there's been even in this Mayan community, now I'm thinking back about 20, 25 years. I was working with the library committee to set up a learning center. And I got a grant and we got computers and the internet. And they were thinking about how to structure the sessions. Now, these folks on the library committee, many of them were trained as teachers. They were all Mayan from this town, but they were trained as teachers. So they said, well, we can bring the fourth graders in at this time, and then we could have the fifth graders come an hour later, and then we could blah, blah, blah. And I thought, uh-oh. And in general, I try to stay in the background and not act like an expert. But here I thought, I know something that I think they would want to know, but I have to tell them. And so I said, I think that organizing things by separating the ages like that, that's not the Mayan way that you're trying to look for. And and I told them history of schooling and age grading, and in order to bureaucratically process lots of kids, I told them that stuff, and their mouths dropped open. They said, "Oh," and I had with me my laptop with a PowerPoint of that Mayan mom who's receiving the toy. it wasn't her, but it was somebody in that study. And they hadn't seen PowerPoints before in this town. So they were interested in the PowerPoint, but they saw that video and they started looking at each other and they said, "Oh, we could do it in the family way." And they switched. Fortunately, they knew another way, but their first inclination, having been trained as teachers, was to do things in that kind of age-graded separation assembly line instruction way. And so to change teacher training, you have to change the teachers and the classroom to be much more along the lines of Lopi. And I'm experimenting with that in my classroom, but if you had a whole school doing it, it would be different than just one classroom. So that's what the teacher who's training horses found out, is that by age fifth grade, they had already learned the assembly line instruction, but also that she needed those other teachers in the school who are also supporting the development of this paradigm, this way of learning. There are lots of really inventive teachers at all levels. And what I told the students, was it today? Yeah. I said, we're doing things differently in this class. You're all teachers in various ways. When you're in a situation where you're responsible for somebody learning, think about how we're doing things in this class. You don't have to do it this way, but I want you to think about other ways that it could be done than assembly line instruction. I want this to be an inspiration for you to experiment with how you handle when you're responsible for somebody else learning. I told him that was one of my main goals. The other is world peace, which I really believe, actually, but it always gets them because I think world peace, oh boy, especially now.
I have maybe one last question, which is that you have been an amazing teacher and mentor of so many students and PhD students and early career scholars, and many of them are full professors now, and doing great work in many educational institutions. Now, these are all in the early stages of their PhDs. And they are taking this course because this is something that indigenous ways of knowing maybe pique their interest. And I would be interested if you have any wisdom or suggestions for them, to as they start exploring in their PhD journey, working with communities, indigenous or non-indigenous communities, marginalized or minoritized, or even general community.
Mainstream.
Yeah, some of these challenges, how they could navigate or avoiding some pitfalls.
So first, an invitation, and that is if you're going to AERA, we're having an afternoon of Lopi poster symposia where many of the people who have been, that Maung Ting Nyeu is describing as people who are now full professors and making big contributions, they will be presenting. And so it's Thursday afternoon, the 9th of April. Please come. And I don't think it's on AERA's schedule yet, but Maung Ting Nyeu has the information. So as AERA gets closer, I think it'll be a fantastic session, because a lot of the people on that map of consortium members from North to South America, a lot of them will be there. So that's an invitation. In terms of career advice, one of the main things I do with the grad students whose committees I'm on, or if I'm their mentor, one of the main things I do is I press them on why do they want to study that thing that they want to study? Because often they're studying something that is close to the thing that's in their heart or in their gut, but is not quite there. And so I think it's really important, and it's a process of discovery, not just in the first year of grad school, but in the 50th year of being a professor, is figuring out what is it I'm doing here? What is my thing that I can contribute to this whole endeavor? What opportunities does my life have for discovering something or explaining something? And we each have different positions in life. We each have different opportunities, experiences, interests. And those can come together for your research direction. So you're just in your first year. Don't be impatient, but do get involved in research. Get going on something, because if you hate that thing that you're involved with now, that'll help you know what it is that you don't hate. So be involved in research. Don't look for the perfect project, but all the while be trying to figure out, why is that thing that I'm being forced to read interesting to me, and that thing that I'm being forced to read is not? So knowing what's boring to you, that's really important. And just reflecting on what in each of our little individual lives, which are short and won't be remembered in 300 years, no matter what we do. But what piece can we add? What can we contribute to something being better, more beautiful, more peaceful, something that we can add? And it needs to be something we're interested in, and something our life has sort of prepared us for so far. So you might wish that you could be in somebody else's shoes, but you're not. You could go some of the places they go. You can learn some of the things they learn, but you bring something from where you've been so far and where your family has come from so far, and what your neighborhood is, that come together. They can come together in what you're doing. And that's not something you'll figure out in the next 4 years. But starting on it, working on it. I mean, you've already started on it, but working on it is a major part of grad school. But it's also a major part of the next years after you get your PhD. And I'm still thinking about it. Like, okay, given where I am now, where should I be putting my energies? What should I be focusing on? Do I want to read that article? Well, it would mean I'm not reading this other article. Okay, I'll let that one go so that I can focus on this one. Yeah. So that's what I do. It drives my students crazy because they are put on the spot to answer the question, why do you want to do that? What is it that you want to do? So I learned that from my advisor, one of my advisors in grad school, Jerry Kagan. I would go into his office, and because I had a meeting with him, and he would say, so what did you learn today? And I would think, oh shoot, what did I learn today? And I would say something, and or he'd ask me about my research project, and then he would sit back and he'd smoke a pipe, sit back and he'd hold his pipe and he'd pull in his lower lip like this, and he'd say, "But Barbara, what is the question?" And I go, "Oh shit, there's that question again. I don't know how to answer it." Well, that's the question I ask my students, and they don't know how to answer it either. But it helps them move towards being able to get the answer to what they're going to do next that will lead them in the direction of what they're going to do after that. So ask yourself that hard question. Ask each other that hard question. What are you working on? What are you really working on? What are you bringing to it? What's the heart of it? I have a research group meeting. Actually, you're all invited. I have a research group meeting online. Maung Ting Nyeu shows up sometimes, of mostly grad students from around the country, but also some professors and some postdocs and some undergrads. And we talk about this stuff. And so a few weeks ago, one of the students was talking about her dissertation project. And I started asking those questions. And I noticed that one of the other people on the call was just nodding along because she recognized it's the same question I had asked her when she was at that phase of working on her dissertation. And it's like, yeah, but they also appreciate it. I mean, it's horrible. I hated that question. When people on the bus would ask me that question, they would, what are you working on? I'd go, oh no, I don't know. But I'd try to answer them. And that would get me one step closer to the next step. So Monday mornings, 9:15 to about 10:30. We usually go over because we get into something. And Maung Ting Nyeu, you could give them the Zoom thing.
Great.
Anytime, and it's drop in. It's don't come if you're not interested or have too much to do. It's a class at UCSC. You could sign up for it as a class because you can go across campuses and sign up for classes, and I've had that happen. Michael McCall is one of the few people who has done that. But the one assignment for the class is only come when you want to and have time to. If you come when you're not interested, you flunk. That's the only requirement. So what it means is people are interested.
Yeah.
People are coming when they need it or want it or are interested. Often we don't have a topic signed up, devised in advance. It's always interesting though. People bring up something that's on their mind and we just go. And sometimes it's, what are you doing for your dissertation? Anyway, you're all invited.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much for your kind invitation. I will share this with them. And again, I would say, thank you so much. I feel that, we learned so much from you today, and we will probably discussing it in the next few sessions. And thank you so much for the generosity, not only of your time, but also with your heart. And we deeply appreciate it.
I appreciate the chance to talk with you all, and I hope to see you again, one place or another. And thank you. And you're very lucky to have Maung Ting Nyeu as your professor. Super, super. Okay, I will sign off.
Yeah, bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Wow. I could not believe that we took the entire class hours. Wow.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be good to.
Yeah, I mean, I'll send you.